I started flying at Hughes Flying Service. I got my license in 1967, and when I got my license, the thought crossed my mind that I wanted to do something with airplanes. I didn't want to just fly around the flagpole and go for the $100 hamburger. I wanted to actually use the airplane, for a productive purpose. I was in college at the University of Michigan at the time, and I continued to fly while I was in school because a friend of mine, Marv Grahn, who lives up in the Traverse City area, his dad had a Cessna 120, and we bounced all over southeast Michigan in that 120. It wasn't unusual for us to meet somewhere on campus. Without saying anything, we'd look up at the sky, we'd look down at our watch and figure out what time we were going to McKinnon Airport to do some flying that day. And the favorite thing I like to tell students when I'm flying with them, doing ground references, is there was a farmer near McKinnon there that had an old bathtub out in the field, and that's what he used for his cows to drink from. And we always turned base at the bathtub. That was our So the Vietnam War was raging, and I knew that I had a fairly low draft number, so I figured, well, I could go into ROTC, and that led me to pilot training and then an assignment flying the F-4 in Germany. And I was fortunate enough to fly low level over most of the European countries, from the UK up into Norway and even down into France. We didn't quite get into Spain, but we did a lot of flying. And I made many friendships there. Nancy and I lived in Germany 4 years, and then later on in life we lived in France for 7 years. So in total, we've more than 10% of our lives have been outside this country, and it's a completely different feeling to understand their culture and what their upbringings are and what their values are and things like that. And we try to bring that back here to the U.S. with us when we return. So from flying the F-4, the war in Vietnam ended, and I was sent to Wright-Patterson because they were drawing down the number of pilots that they had, and I was really lucky to be an engineer working on the F-16 full-scale development program. But first, I decided I wanted to keep flying, so even before I met my new boss at Wright-Patterson, I went over to base ops at Wright-Pat, and I knew that they had a group of T-39s flying there. And I said, you know what, I would really like to fly the T-39 while I'm here for 3 years at Wright-Pat. And he said, well, okay, we need pilots, but I won't let you fly 1 day a month. So if you figure 3 years, I had 36 days of flying in the T-39, but I used that effectively because one of the things that I wanted to do was get an airline transport pilot rating. And at that time, in order to take the check ride, you had to do V1 cut in the real airplane, which is chopping one engine to idle and continuing the takeoff while you're still on the runway, and doing stalls in the airplane. And according to the rules that we had, we weren't allowed to do that. But I got my ATP in the T-39. The commander was Billy Chad, and he said, I don't want to know. And so a group of us worked with the FAA in Columbus and got my ATP there. And then to get to test pilot school, I had to fly the A-10. I didn't have to, but I looked around for another job, and I found that job at Hagerstown flying the A-10. And just in perspective, I don't know how many total A-10s were produced, but when I was there, we were around 300, somewhere in there. We would fly a new one about every 4 or 5 days at that time. It was great flying, and one of the things that I remember is when I would bring the airplane back, it was this huge chain link fence area on the ramp in Hagerstown, and I'd pull through this great big gate. And if the wind was blowing right, I would squirt the windshield cleaner because the fire department guys were right there next to the gate, and try to get them wet, and they laughed at me. And of course, I got wet, when I left there. But the other thing about that compound is on the far end there was just a dead-end gravel road on the other side of the fence. And if I saw a family or a father and a young son or somebody similar to that, I would taxi the airplane all the way over and turn around at the fence, not to give them any jet blast, but just to wave, because to acknowledge that they were there and that child may someday want to do what I was doing. That assignment got me picked up for the test pilot school, and that was a terrific assignment. When we were there, as Chris will tell you, we flew all the airplanes that they had, and it was a lot of fun flying what we call tower flybys, because you're literally flying past a tower between 50 feet and 100 feet altitude so that they can read your tape line altitude. but we did it from 180 knots all the way up to the full power pass in military power, not in aftermarket. And I remember the airplane, the fastest I went was 598 doing a tower flyby. That's pretty fast at 50 to 100 feet. And the turn radius is huge. You know, from a 200 knot pass, the turn radius is like that. But 500 knot pass, you really have to plan the turn so that you can line up on the line properly. I left Edwards, went to the safety center for a year and a half, and then I left active duty and went to work for CalSpan and started flying with the Air National Guard. I'm going to finish up my military career right about here, because I did end up through the Guard. I ended up with 24 years of military service. But what I want to mention are the names of some people who were lost during that time when I was in the military. The first one was Dave Osborne. He was a classmate of mine at the University of Michigan. We honored him at his grave. He had died 50 years earlier last September, and we had a flyover. Thank you very much for doing the missing man for us. He died in an F-4 accident out in Arizona. One of my undergraduate pilot training classmates, Gary Woods, died in a T-38. They had a wing separation, and it was a known problem with the T-38, which was eventually fixed, that there could be some cracks in the wing area. I had two Italian students in my class, Claudio Cialca and Giancarlo Wanello. They both flew F-104s when they went back to Italy, and they both died in F-104 accidents. The first accident that I had direct contact with was, we lost Jim Furley when I was in Germany. It was crazy, no reason for this accident, but Jim and his navigator were on the way back from a low-level mission. They were up above the clouds, and the nav wanted to do a roll, and Jim said, yeah, go ahead and do a roll. And one of the things you have to watch out for when you got external fuel still in the fuel tanks is a phenomenon called inertial coupling, where as you begin to roll, the nose pitches up just as you complete the roll. And when that happened, the airplane departed. The backseater got out. Jim didn't really know how high he was, because his airplane went down through the clouds out of control. And his ejection was successful, but the chute didn't open properly because he was so low. And I remember that day because I was flying with the wing commander, who had just been promoted to brigadier general. And when you're a BG, you need to have an instructor pilot in the back seat. So I was in the back with Jim Browning, and we were at a British base up on the Belgium-German border, and we got the call that the accident occurred. So it's kind of an interesting moment to get into the back seat with a general officer in front, going back to his base where he knows he's just lost an airplane. And I said, Jim, this is just as an important flight for us as it was for them. Let's do everything just the way we know we're supposed to do it. We'll get back and find out what's going on. And we got down the ladder, the flight surgeon was there, and the first words he said was, Jim Furley is dead. And that's a pretty sobering moment. Carmen Lucci, Doug Halliday, and Steve Monaghan crashed in a B-26 when I was a student at the test pilot school. All three of them died. The wings separated on that airplane as well. I'm not sure what they were doing with it, but I do know I'd flown the airplane 4 days before that. So it can be a little bit close. Ron Ferris, one of my students when I was an instructor there, passed away in an F-4 accident, hydraulic failure, and his chute didn't function properly when he ejected. Bill News was another one of my students, flight test engineer. He died in the backseat of a T-38, had a mid-air collision during a chase mission with an F-16. Bob Winning died in a TG-7A motorized glider that was at Edwards being tested because of some accidents that had occurred at the U.S. Air Force Academy. Joe Bill Dryden died during radar testing of an F-16. They had done a single pass to test the radar, and he was doing the turn back maneuver, and something bad happened to his airplane. He ejected fine, but his parachute was drawn into the firewall of the airplane crashed. And the last one was Dave Campbell, who was in my National Guard unit, transferred to a unit out in Fresno, California, and died during air-to-air combat training. And the reason that I bring these names up is because I'm here after flying for 55 years. They're people who will be forever young and will never have the opportunity to receive this award. and that's why I bring this up. So then, I went with Northwest Airlines. A friend of ours on the Guard got me hired, and that's, Chris and I already knew each other, but we associated with each other when I was at Northwest, and I flew the 727 sideways, and in the right seat, and the 320, and then the DC-9, and then back to the 320 as a captain. And those were great years. I got to see the whole country, and in some cases the world, because I was traveling for other things. And all of a sudden, on a Sunday morning, I got an email from Claude Lele in Toulouse, France, and he said, "We're looking for an American to join our flight test team. Are you interested?" And I hit the print button and ran downstairs and showed it to Nancy. And it took a year to get all of the things done, and to be able to go, get all the paperwork done, all the visas and everything. And I got to Toulouse. And I was sitting down with the HR people in the flight test building, and Claude Lele walks in. He said, "Would you like to fly this afternoon?" I said, "Sure." He said, "In the 380?" And I said, "Absolutely." So that was my first flight. And a lot of interesting things happened in the A380 when I was flying it. But just some, a couple of the highlights were, I did make the first landing in the U.S. In the A380 at JFK. I took the airplane on a Southeast Asia tour. And we were in Bangkok, Thailand, getting ready to push back to go to Chiang Mai, which is about an hour and a half north, and they pushed the airplane's wingtip into their hangar, and the wingtip was damaged. I ended up on TV explaining that to the Thai TV people, which had to be translated, of course. But I knew that it was okay to take the other winglet off. The tip wasn't damaged, it was just a wingtip fence on the other end. So I had done the flight testing to certify those winglets with the winglet off, and I'd say, okay, take both winglets off, and we'll go to Chiang Mai anyway, which we did in the afternoon. So the next day, then we went to Hong Kong, and we had to do a fly through of Hong Kong Harbor. You can see that video online if you look around for it. And we joke about it because if you see that video, you don't see the winglets on the wingtips. Well, the A380 gets its name because it fits into an 80-meter box. And we joke that that's the A379.
That's awesome.
And then I turned 65, and they said, "You're done." And that's a rule that they have here in the U.S. and it's also in France. And we talked a little bit about the impact on our family life for being an aviator. And I know it's tough, for as a wife, because our schedules change constantly. We're going to be gone for long periods of time. Chris and I talked about this just yesterday when we were driving home, as to how tough it can be for our spouses. We have been very fortunate that we've been able to spend time in most of the countries in Europe. We've been to South Africa, we've been to South America, we've been to Asia, and so you need to find the benefits for sometimes for all of that heartache that can occur when you're flying. Anyway, thank you very much. This is an honor, both from the FAA and to all my friends here, to receive this award.
All right.